She heard the soil moving, and when the maid dug into the rose bed, she didn't just pull out the Mafia heir gasping for air. She looked up and saw his future stepmother watching from the balcony, smiling like the burial was only the beginning. Now Annette has one question burning through her mind as she clutches the evidence Jody left behind. How many more children has this woman buried in silence? And is she coming for her next slash? Annette George froze when she heard it, soft, muffled and trembling. Not the wind. Not an animal. A cry. A child's cry. Her watering pail slipped from her hand, hitting the soil with a dull thud as she dropped to her knees beside the rose beds. The earth felt loose beneath her fingers, freshly disturbed. Too loose. Her breath hitched as she dug with frantic, shaking hands, clawing away clumps of dirt until something cold brushed against her palm. A tiny hand. Still. Covered in soil. Benjamin. Her voice cracked. Dear God, Benjamin. The little boy she tucked into bed last night lay buried beneath the garden soil, his face pale and smeared with dirt, his breaths so shallow they barely lifted his chest. Annette yanked him upward, brushing dirt from his lips, sobbing as she pressed him against her uniform. Help, she screamed toward the mansion. Someone help. But the McPherson mansion remained silent, its tall windows glinting in the morning light like judging eyes. No one came. No one ever did. As Annette held the broken, gasping boy in her arms, she felt a presence behind her. She looked up. Jody Muller stood on the balcony above. Perfect hair, silk robe, arms crossed lightly. Watching. And she was smiling. Because this wasn't an accident. This was a warning. Before we go any further, if you believe innocent voices deserve to be heard, you're in the right place. Like this video, and hit the subscribe button. This community is for people who care about justice. Now, let's continue. Hours later, Annette sat on the cold marble steps of the mansion, her uniform streaked with mud and fear. The ambulance lights had faded long ago, but their colors still flashed in the back of her mind. Blue and red, the colors of panic, the colors of accusation. The police had asked her the same questions repeatedly. Where were you? Why were you alone? How did you find him? Her answers didn't seem to matter. Each one only made them look at her with more suspicion. Inside, the house was too quiet, like a predator waiting behind a still surface. Jody moved around gracefully, her silk robe floating behind her like smoke. She pressed tissues under her eyes, though her tears never quite reached them. She was with him this morning, Jody whispered to the officers. I don't want to suggest anything, but Annette was the last one who saw Benjamin alive. Alive. The word stabbed deep. Annette's fingers curled in her lap. I didn't. But footsteps thundered at the door. Pete McPherson stormed inside, eyes sharp as blades, jaw clenched. He looked like a man capable of leveling an entire city block with a single command. Where is my son? He demanded. Jody launched herself into his arms, voice breaking in dramatic sobs. Pete, darling, she found him. She said she heard him crying. She was outside with him. Pete's gaze cut to Annette, filled with confusion, fury, fear. Annette, he said slowly. You found Benjamin buried. How? I heard him, she whispered. He cried out. Jody stepped closer. Then how did you know where to dig? The question cracked through the room like lightning. Annette felt her throat close. She had no answer. Nothing except truth. I just heard him. Convenient, Jody murmured. Reporters gathered outside moments later, shouting from behind the gates. Live, Maid saves Mafia heir breaking. Inside job? Servant under question. Every headline twisted her story until she barely recognized it. Pete's men began to avoid her. Some glared. Some spat insults under their breath. Benjamin, pale and terrified, avoided her gaze. At one point, she heard Jody whisper to him, soft as poison. Sweetheart, be quiet about what happened, or Daddy won't believe you. Annette felt like she was drowning in a sea of lies. Something was terribly wrong, and the only person who knew the truth was a scared 6-year-old boy. Late that night, unable to sleep, Annette slipped outside, drawn back to the garden. Moonlight spilled across the soil where she had found Benjamin. She knelt again, brushing the ground with shaking fingers. Something metallic glinted in the dirt. She dug it out. A gold hairpin, engraved with looping letters, JM. Her breath left her lungs. Jody Muller. Annette lifted her eyes toward the mansion. A single window glowed faintly. A figure stood perfectly still behind the glass, watching her. Annette whispered, She's not who she says she is, and I'll prove it. The night wind swept through the roses, scattering petals like confessions. And just like that, Annette realized the truth. This wasn't about an accident. This was about a plan. A deadly one. And the woman Pete McPherson planned to marry was willing to bury a child alive to make it happen. Annette stood frozen beneath the moonlight, the gold hairpin trembling in her hand. The mansion behind her glowed softly, a beautiful shell with rot spreading inside it. She could still feel the weight of Jodi's eyes on her, even though the silhouette in the window had vanished. The roses whispered in the breeze, petals skimming across the soil like tiny ghosts. Annette closed her fist around the hairpin and rose slowly, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She only lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her tiny servant's room, wondering how someone so elegant, so adored, could be capable of burying a child alive. Morning came far too quickly. When Annette stepped into the hallway, she heard soft murmurs drifting from the main living room. Jodi's voice, fragile and trembling, with Pete's low growl cutting between her words. Annette edged closer, stopping just before the doorway. "Pete," Jodi whispered, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. "I just don't feel safe anymore. Not with her here." "She saved Benjamin," Pete countered, but even he sounded uncertain, distant. Jodi sniffed loudly, as if trying to hold back sobs. "Did she? Or is that what she wants us to think?" Pete stayed silent. Annette's stomach twisted. Jodi pressed her face into Pete's chest, her voice small and trembling. "I don't want to accuse her. I really don't. But Annette was the last one with Benjamin. And that hairpin she wears, she has ones just like it, doesn't she? Fancy little things she buys to feel special." Annette almost gasped aloud. The audacity. Her hairpin, the real one, was a plastic clip bought at a discount store. There was nothing fancy about it. Pete exhaled, his frustration sharp. "I don't want to believe she did anything. She's been good to Benjamin." Jodi's voice hardened, just slightly. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who betray us." Annette stepped back before they noticed her. Jodi's words slithered under her skin, tightening like vines. She hurried toward the servants' corridor, trying to steady her breath. But the moment she opened the door to her room, her heart dropped. Pete's men were inside, rifling through her drawers, lifting her mattress, emptying boxes of folded uniforms onto the floor. One of them glanced at her. "Boss said to check for anything unusual. Don't take it personal." "How? How could I take it?" Annette whispered. The taller guard stepped toward her, holding up a stack of papers. Routine. Nothing more. But his eyes were cold. Suspicious. Condemning. Annette clenched the hairpin in her hand. She wanted to scream that the real threat slept in silk sheets upstairs, but her voice stayed trapped in her chest. When the men finally left, they'd overturned nearly everything she owned. Her room felt violated, like her life had been cracked open and thrown onto the floor. And sitting neatly on her pillow, perfectly placed, was Benjamin's favorite toy robot. Annette stopped breathing for a moment. She hadn't touched it. It wasn't hers. Jodi had been in here. Of course she had. Annette sat on the edge of the bed, her knees weak. She picked up the toy robot with trembling fingers, its plastic surface still clean, untouched by the dirt of yesterday. Benjamin avoided her now, shrinking behind Jodi's legs whenever she walked by. His eyes held fear. Fear planted deliberately, carefully, by the woman who claimed to love him. Annette pressed the robot to her chest, fighting tears. She needed to tell someone, anyone, but who would believe her? She was just the maid. The outsider. The easiest target. There was a knock at her door. Detective Ramirez stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "Miss George." She stood quickly. "Detective." "Just a few more questions," he said, flipping open his notebook. "Benjamin's toy was found in your room. Care to explain?" Her jaw dropped. "I didn't. Someone put it there." "That's what most people say," he replied calmly. "But I have to consider every possibility." The walls felt like they were closing in. "Detective, please. I never hurt Benjamin. I love that child. I would never." Ramirez sighed, rubbing his temples. "We're not charging you, Miss George. But things don't look good. Until this is sorted, you should avoid leaving the estate." Avoid leaving. As if she were already imprisoned. When Ramirez left, Annette sank onto her bed. The robot sat on her lap, its plastic smile mocking her. She slipped the hairpin from her pocket, staring at the engraved initials again. JM. She knew what it meant. She knew exactly who had dropped it. But evidence wasn't evidence unless someone believed it. Her chest tightened painfully. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered to the empty room. The mansion creaked softly in response, walls murmuring with old secrets. Annette pressed a trembling hand over her face. "If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, hit like, the narrator murmured softly, almost like a whisper behind her thoughts. An invitation for those listening to recognize the injustice, to stand with the accused. Annette blinked away tears. She wasn't done. She couldn't be. Something wasn't just wrong, it was rotten. Jody was spinning a web around the entire household, and Annette could feel the threads tightening around her throat. Later that afternoon, she walked through the halls and felt it again, that prickling awareness at the back of her neck. Someone was watching her, following her with their eyes. She glanced behind her, but no one was there. Only shadows. Only silence. When she passed Benjamin's door, it was slightly ajar. She paused. He sat inside, hugging his knees, staring at the floor. "Benjamin," she whispered. He flinched, shrinking back. "Daddy said, I shouldn't talk to you." Her throat closed. "I saved your life." He looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Jody told me you're mad at me, that you think I'm bad luck." Annette's breath left her like a punch to the stomach. "Sweetheart, that's not true. I would never." Footsteps snapped down the hallway. Jody's heels. Benjamin scrambled into bed, hiding under the covers, as if Annette were the monster. Jody appeared in the doorway, arms folded lightly. "Annette, haven't you caused enough trouble for today?" Annette felt the hairpin burn in her pocket. "Jody, why was Benjamin's toy in my room?" Jody lifted an eyebrow, amused. "Children wander. Toys wander. But if you're asking whether I planted it," she laughed softly. "Why would I need to? People believe what they want to believe." Annette stared at her. Jody leaned closer. "You're too easy, Annette. Too trusting. That's why no one listens to you. But that's not my fault, is it?" She glided away, her perfume lingering like poison in the air. Annette's hands shook with anger. She returned to her room, shut the door, and leaned against it. She felt watched even here. Every corner of the mansion felt hostile, like the walls themselves whispered warnings she couldn't quite hear. And yet, she wasn't giving up. She couldn't. Benjamin's life depended on her. If she walked away, Jody would win. Annette set the robot beside the hairpin on her bedside table. 2 small pieces of evidence. 2 small truths waiting to grow. The house groaned, settling into its bones for the night. Annette sat alone in the dim light, heart pounding, mind racing. Something was coming. Something dangerous. And she was completely, terrifyingly alone. Annette didn't sleep. Not really. She lay curled on her thin mattress, replaying every moment of the day. Benjamin's trembling voice, Jody's cold smile, the toy robot on her pillow. By dawn, exhaustion clung to her bones, but something else pressed heavier on her chest, dread. When she stepped into the hallway, the house felt unnaturally still, like it was holding its breath. She made her way toward Benjamin's room, hesitating only a moment before gently pushing the door open. Benjamin sat on his bed, staring at his hands. He didn't flinch this time, but he looked hollow. Too quiet for a child who had just survived being buried alive. "Good morning, sweetheart," Annette whispered. He looked up slowly. Something frightened flickered behind his eyes. He slid off the bed and walked toward her, feet shuffling across the carpet. When he reached the doorway, he tugged lightly at her sleeve. His voice was barely a breath. "Jody says Mommy's ghost is angry, because of you." Annette froze. The words sank like stones in her stomach. What did she tell you, Benjamin?" He twisted his fingers together nervously. "She said Mommy watches from the shadows. And she saw you digging me up. She said Mommy thinks you're trying to take her place." Annette knelt, holding his trembling hands. "Benjamin, your Mommy loved you. She would never be angry with you. Or with me." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then suddenly lunged forward and wrapped his small arms around her neck. His entire body shook. "I'm scared," he whispered. Annette held him, feeling his heart hammer against hers. "I know. I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." But the moment was fragile, too fragile. Because footsteps approached from down the hall, that familiar sharp rhythm of expensive heels striking polished wood. Benjamin pulled away instantly, fear widening his eyes. Jody appeared at the end of the hall, like a figure stepping out of smoke. Her silk robe shimmered in the morning light, her hair perfectly arranged, as though she hadn't spent the night destroying someone else's life. "Well," she said sweetly, "isn't this a lovely little moment?" Annette rose slowly, placing herself slightly between Jody and Benjamin. He needed comfort. "Oh, I'm sure he did," Jody replied, her smile stretching too wide. She bent to Benjamin's eye level. "Sweetheart, why don't you go downstairs and find your father? Tell him I'll join him soon." Benjamin hesitated, glancing back at Annette. Jody's eyes flickered sharply. He scurried away. And then it was just the two of them. Jody sighed dramatically and ran her fingers along the doorframe. Annette dear, I know you're trying your best, but comforting Benjamin? After everything that happened? It's not very smart. Annette kept her voice steady. He's terrified. You're making it worse. Oh please. Jody's smile sharpened. Children frighten easily, especially when you whisper to them about ghosts. Annette's breath caught. I never. Careful. Jody tapped her cheek lightly, mockingly. Your stories are starting to contradict each other. Jody glided past her, silk brushing against Annette's arm like a threat disguised as touch. Just before turning the corner, she paused. Her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. You really should stop sneaking around the garden at night. Someone might think you're hiding something. Annette's heart lurched. Jody knew. About the hairpin. About the rose bed. About everything. When Jody disappeared around the corner, Annette pressed a hand over her chest, fighting panic. Something about the way she said it, smiling, calm, confident, told Annette she hadn't just been caught. She was being hunted. Later that afternoon, a fog rolled over the estate gardens, wrapping the rose beds in a pale mist. Annette stepped outside, unable to shake Jody's words. She needed to look again. Needed proof. Needed something solid to hold on to before this nightmare swallowed her whole. She reached the rose garden. The soil had settled, but faint impressions still rippled through the dirt, stains of that horrifying night. Annette crouched, brushing her fingers along the earth until she stopped. There. A faint indentation. Barely visible, but unmistakable. A heel print. Small, narrow, and expensive, the kind Jody always wore. Her breath hitched. She followed the faint pattern. There were more, leading toward the very spot where she had dug Benjamin out. The shape, the angle, the depth, they told a story, a terrifying one. Jody had been standing right where Benjamin had been buried. Annette swallowed, forcing her hands to move as she sifted through the soil. Something metallic glinted beneath the dirt. She dug quickly, her fingers scraping the earth. Then she pulled it free. A gold hairpin, engraved with the same delicate initials, JM. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She had found the first one last night. This was another. Another pin. Another mistake. Another truth Jody had failed to bury deeply enough. Annette stared at the hairpin, fear melting into fury. Jody wasn't just lying. She wasn't just manipulating. She had been here. Before Annette. Before anyone. Standing over the freshly turned soil, where a child fought for breath. Annette closed her fist around the pin, her resolve hardening like steel. This ends with you exposed, she whispered to the quiet garden. A gust of wind swept through the roses, carrying petals across her shoes like a small, trembling sign. She wasn't imagining this. She wasn't losing her mind. Jody Muller had buried Benjamin. And she had tried so carefully, to bury Annette right beside him. Annette straightened, her heart still racing, but her voice steady as she whispered to the roses. I'm not afraid of your ghosts, Jody. The garden stayed silent, mist curling around her ankles like a warning. But Annette didn't run. She slipped the hairpin into her pocket and turned back toward the mansion. Whatever haunted this house, whatever Jody whispered into the shadows and children's ears, Annette would face it, and she would uncover every secret Jody thought she had buried. The mansion was different at night. Quieter, colder. As Annette slipped through the darkened hallways, the air felt heavier, almost watchful. The staff had retreated to their quarters hours ago. Pete had locked himself in his study, and Jody... Well, Jody thrived in darkness. That was why Annette moved carefully, silently, like someone stepping through the house of a predator. She reached the far corridor, the unused west wing. Most of the doors here were locked, draped in dust sheets, forgotten by everyone except the ghosts Jody liked to weaponize. But tonight, Annette wasn't hunting spirits. She was hunting answers. She pulled a key she had borrowed weeks ago from the butler's ring, slipped it into the lock, and pushed the old door open. The room smelled of stale perfume and long-dead flowers. Moonlight bled through thin curtains, revealing stacked boxes, old furniture, and desks covered with papers no one had touched in years. Annette moved toward a filing cabinet, her flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. She tugged the drawer open. Invoices. Receipts. Medical documents. Most looked normal. Estate expenses, security upgrades, staff paperwork, until she found a small envelope marked Private, JM. Her stomach tightened. Inside were purchase orders for rare, injectable sedatives. Strong. Fast-acting. The kind used in hospitals or kidnappings. Doses matched a child's weight. Benjamin's weight. Annette's breath hitched. She clutched the papers, but before she could read further, Footsteps. She froze. A shadow crossed the doorway. Heavy. Slow. Pete. He stepped inside, rubbing his temples, his expression twisted in confusion and exhaustion. When he saw Annette, the confusion hardened immediately into something sharper. Why are you here? His voice cut the air. Why are you sneaking around the closed wings of my house? Annette swallowed hard. Mr. McPherson, I was just trying to. Jody told me, he interrupted, that you've been talking to Benjamin's photos, whispering to them, obsessed with the boy. Annette felt the sting of the lie like a slap. He believed her. Of course he did. Sir, that's not true, she whispered. Jody is twisting everything I do. Pete took several steps forward, anger simmering beneath the surface. Not the loud kind, the dangerous kind. Annette, my family is hanging by a thread. My son was buried alive. Jody says you've been acting strangely. Now I find you rummaging through private documents. Annette's hands shook around the sedative invoices. She wanted to show him, wanted to scream the truth. But she knew, if she accused Jody without proof, it would only drive Pete deeper into her arms. Sir, she said instead, someone in this house is hurting Benjamin. Pete stopped. Something flickered in his eyes. Fear, denial, grief. Then he hardened again. I don't want to hear conspiracy theories from a maid. He stepped back. Stay in your quarters tonight. Do not wander. That's an order. He left without waiting for an answer. And Annette was alone again. She made her way back toward her room, but voices drifted from Pete's study. Quiet at first, then rising. Jody's voice, sharp and dripping with faux sympathy. Pete, you're falling apart. I'm trying to help you. But she's dangerous. I've seen how she looks at Benjamin. Pete's reply was strained, tired, wounded. I don't know what to think anymore. Well, Jody said, stepping closer. Annette could hear her heels clicking, the soft rustle of silk. I think you're forgetting what happened to your first wife. You ignored the signs then too. Annette's blood ran cold. Pete hissed quietly. Don't you dare bring her into this. Oh, but I must. Jody's voice softened, becoming something sickeningly sweet. You couldn't protect her. And now you can't protect your son. I'm the only one holding this family together. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Dangerous. Then Pete's voice broke slightly. Just leave me alone for a moment. Jody walked out, closing the study door softly behind her. She didn't see Annette hiding in the shadows. But Annette saw everything. Later, when the mansion finally slept, Annette slipped into Jody's dressing room. Golden light spilled from vanity bulbs, illuminating racks of designer gowns and shelves lined with perfume bottles. But Annette wasn't here for beauty. She opened drawer after drawer until she found it, a small photo album tucked beneath a box of jewelry. She flipped it open, and froze. Jody smiling. Her hair a different color, her name different on every caption. A new man beside her in every photo. A new home, a new lifestyle. But the same pattern, wealthy men, their children. And then Annette found it. A picture of Jody with a little girl. A sweet, gap-toothed smile. Her arms wrapped around Jody's neck. The caption read, My sweet Emily, forever in my heart. Annette turned the page. The girl's obituary. Drowned in a bathtub. Ruling, accident. Annette's hands shook violently. This was not a stepmother. This was a predator. A collector. A destroyer. And Benjamin was her next victim. Annette returned to her quarters with the photo tucked beneath her apron. The hallway light flickered above her, buzzing faintly like a warning. Inside her room, she sat on the edge of her bed, the weight of everything pressing down on her. The hairpins. The sedative invoices. The threatening whispers. The child in the photo. Then, a soft knock. She opened the door. Benjamin stood there in his pajamas, clutching a blanket to his chest. His eyes were puffy, his cheeks blotchy from crying. Miss Annette, he whispered. Can I stay with you? Just for a little. Her heart cracked open. Of course, she said gently. He crawled into a bed, curling small and tight like someone who had never known safety. Annette sat beside him, brushing a thumb across his forehead. Are you scared? She asked softly. He nodded. Jody said the shadows talk. But I don't think Mommy would let them hurt me. Annette held back tears. No, she whispered. Your Mommy would protect you. And so will I. Benjamin reached for her hand. His fingers fit so small and trustingly between hers. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Annette felt a spark, tiny but certain, of hope. She leaned closer, whispering into the quiet. If you're still here, thank you. Stories like this bring us together. Share if you care about justice. Benjamin drifted to sleep, his breathing soft and steady at last. Annette stayed awake, watching, guarding. Because now she knew, she wasn't just uncovering Jodi's secrets. She was standing in Jodi's way. And Jodi Muller did not tolerate obstacles. The estate had grown quieter in the hours after midnight. Annette moved like a whisper through the polished halls, the faint tick of her heel against marble almost drowned by the hum of the old chandelier. Every step carried the weight of discovery. Every shadow seemed to watch. She knew the risk. Jodi's suspicion had been simmering ever since the dinner, and tonight, curiosity had won over caution. The walk-in closet was tucked behind the master suite, an innocuous doorway that had always seemed too tidy, too perfect. Annette's fingers traced the seam of the wardrobe panels, searching for anything that betrayed a secret. A slight click under the third shelf caught her attention. Kneeling, she pressed and slid the panel. The gap revealed a hidden compartment, narrow but deep, like a tomb for secrets. Inside, the contents made her stomach tighten. Burner phones, stacked neatly, each labeled with initials she didn't recognize. Folders of photographs, Jodi smiling alongside men whose wealth was obvious in the sharp cut of their suits, the glint of expensive watches, the rare bottles perched on marble counters. And children. Children whose faces were innocent yet haunted, their eyes looking at the camera as if they already knew the danger that lurked behind Jodi's charm. Among the photographs lay several encrypted USB drives. Annette's fingers shook slightly as she lifted one, the weight of possibility pressing down. This wasn't just obsession or greed. This was meticulous planning, a career built on infiltration and erasure. Her heart pounded, yet she forced herself to remain methodical. Back in her small study, the glow of her laptop illuminated the lines of concentration on her face. Names scribbled on the back of photos were painstakingly cross-checked against online records. Each name matched reports buried in local news archives. A drowning in a lake, a fire that consumed a summer house, a car accident that had left questions unanswered. Patterns emerged like a cruel mosaic. Jodi had a history that spanned cities, families, even lifetimes. A serial infiltrator, a predator hidden in plain sight. Annette's fingers hovered over the keyboard. One wrong move could alert Jodi, but she couldn't stop. Carefully, she crafted an anonymous message to Detective Harrow, the only contact she trusted with such explosive information. She attached images, transcriptions, locations, everything that painted a clear, terrifying picture. As the message sent, a chill ran down her spine. Somewhere across the estate, Jodi was stirring. Perhaps she hadn't touched the closet in months. Perhaps she had returned to her nightly rituals, but something shifted in the air. The house felt different, like the walls themselves had taken notice. The next morning, subtle signs of Jodi's unease were impossible to miss. The way her eyes scanned the room during breakfast, lingering too long on locked cabinets and ornate shelves. The faint tremor in her hand as she poured coffee. Even her smile, sharp as it was, seemed forced, brittle. Annette observed quietly, sipping tea as if nothing had changed, though inside she counted the minutes until her next move. By afternoon, Annette had organized what she had discovered. Each USB, each phone, each photograph was catalogued, encrypted, backed up. There was no turning back. She wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. She was building armor for herself against the very woman who had so carefully ensnared the lives of others. Jodi's paranoia grew more visible with each passing hour. A hand lingered on a drawer, a glance lingered too long on a visitor, her usual command of the house fractured. She didn't know how much Annette had uncovered, but instinct screamed at her that someone knew. Annette, meanwhile, allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. She was no longer simply surviving in the shadow of Jodi's schemes, she was fighting back. And if the detective acted quickly, if her message reached the right eyes, this might be the moment when Jodi's carefully constructed empire of deceit began to crumble. As night fell, the estate grew silent again, the kind of silence that didn't comfort but warned. Somewhere in the shadows, Jodi moved, restless, sensing a presence she could not yet see. And Annette, armed with truth and determination, prepared for the storm that was coming. The morning light slanted through the grand windows, but it brought no warmth. The house seemed heavier, oppressive, as if the walls themselves had grown aware of the secrets brewing inside. Annette moved cautiously through the kitchen, her hands clasped around a mug of lukewarm tea, eyes flicking toward Pete. His expression was unreadable, but the faint furrow in his brow carried a warning she couldn't ignore. "Annette," Pete began, his voice unusually tight. "We need to talk." She followed him to the drawing room, heart hammering against her ribs. Jodi sat there, a faint smile curving her lips, as though she had anticipated this confrontation. Annette's stomach sank. "Pete, you have to listen," she started, but Jody interrupted smoothly, her tone honeyed yet edged with steel. "Pete, I don't think Annette is safe here. For your family, for you. I found her snooping around last night. She's curious, too curious. It's dangerous." Pete's eyes flickered between them, and Annette could see the conflict tearing at him. He had trusted her, even welcomed her presence, but Jody's words planted a seed of doubt that began to grow, twisting his instincts. I can't take chances," Pete said finally, voice breaking. "Annette, you have to leave." The words hit like ice water. Annette's hands went to her chest. "Pete, please, listen to me. I'm trying to protect you, your family." "Jody." "Enough," Pete barked, his frustration erupting. "I said leave. Now." Benjamin's small figure appeared behind Pete, tearful eyes wide. "Papa, please. Don't send her away. She's the only one who can help us." His voice cracked with desperation. "Please, Papa." Pete's hands shook as he ran them through his hair, a man overwhelmed by pressure from all sides. I can't." Annette stepped forward, gently taking Benjamin's trembling hands. "I'm not your enemy, Benjamin. I'm here to stop her before it's too late. You have to trust me." Pete's eyes hardened. "I said leave. I don't want to hear another word." Tears blurred Annette's vision, but she forced herself to calm. Leaving now would destroy her chance to gather proof of Jody's crimes. She needed one last glimpse behind the house's polished surfaces, one last piece of evidence to stop the unraveling before it went too far. That night, she slipped through the servant corridor, footsteps silent against the stone floors. Every creak threatened to betray her, but she pressed on, moving toward the basement. The air grew cooler, damp with the scent of mildew and secrecy. The faint hum of electricity buzzed from a corner, where a steel trunk gleamed under the single bare bulb. Annette knelt, heart racing. The lock was complex, but years of handling doors and cabinets trained her hands to finesse mechanisms others thought impossible. Click. She lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of forged documents, identification cards, passports from distant countries, all bearing the faces of people who didn't exist. Annette's mind raced. Jody's network was bigger than she had feared. This wasn't just manipulation, just infiltration. It was a fully constructed web of lies, and she was caught in the center of it. A soft sound behind her froze her mid-breath. "You really shouldn't be here," Jody said, voice low and deadly, stepping from the shadows. Her eyes glittered with malice. "Dead maids can't talk." Annette's chest tightened, but she didn't move. She knew the threat was real. Every step, every breath counted. Jody advanced, the steel-toed boots echoing against the concrete floor. Annette's mind raced. Options, exits, anything. The servant corridor offered a narrow chance, a path Jody might overlook in her confidence. With a sudden, desperate lunge, Annette pushed the trunk aside and sprinted toward the corridor. The walls closed in around her, shadows twisting as she ducked under a low arch, heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear Jody's voice, sharp and furious, fading behind her as she disappeared into the labyrinth of narrow hallways reserved for staff, hidden from the estate's opulent main floors. Finally, she emerged in the back courtyard, gasping for air, clutching the USB drives and forged documents to her chest. She was battered, exhausted, and trembling, but she was alive. And now, more than ever, she had the evidence to prove that Jody's empire of deceit extended far beyond this estate. The night swallowed her figure as she moved into the shadows, determination hardening like steel. The house had tried to turn against her, but Annette had found the cracks. And somewhere, deep in the silence of the estate, Jody seethed, realizing that this game of secrets and lies was far from over. The late afternoon sun had drained from the sky when the first scream tore through the estate. Annette had been pacing the servant corridors, restless and haunted by the steel trunk she had glimpsed in the basement. Her instincts, honed over weeks of secrecy, told her something terrible was happening. Rushing toward the main house, she found Benjamin slumped at the bottom of the grand staircase, pale and trembling. His small frame shook as Pete and Jody hovered over him, panic and confusion etched across their faces. "Benjamin." Pete's voice cracked. "Somebody get help." Annette moved faster than thought, pushing past Jody's outstretched arm. "I've got this," she said, kneeling beside the boy. His pulse was weak, shallow breaths rattling through his chest. She recognized the signs immediately: poison. Someone had tried to kill him. The paramedics arrived, but Annette refused to leave. She rode in the ambulance silently, keeping a careful distance, eyes darting to the hospital's entrance. She had to know if Jody would follow. And she did. Moments later, a shadow slipped through the automatic doors of the emergency room. Annette's breath caught as she recognized the familiar glide of Jodie's movements. In her hand, a syringe gleamed under the sterile fluorescent lights, deadly intent coiled in every precise motion. Annette's heartbeat spiked. She lunged, grabbing Jodie's wrist with all the strength she could muster. "Not tonight," she hissed. Jodie's eyes widened in fury, but her reaction was instantaneous. In one swift movement, she twisted free, shoving Annette back and disappearing down the hall before the security cameras, or anyone else, could register her presence. The echo of her heels faded, leaving only the sterile scent of antiseptic and the hum of fluorescent lights. Annette exhaled, trembling but alive, clutching the syringe Jodie had dropped. She couldn't let this go unreported. Not now, not ever. Outside the hospital, under the shadow of the emergency entrance, she contacted Pete's right-hand man, Dominic. He arrived swiftly, his face a mask of worry and confusion. "I have proof," Annette said, breathless, revealing USB drives, photographs, and the forged identities she had recovered. "Everything Jodie has done, every child, every family, every disappearance, it's all here. You have to see it before Pete trusts her again." Dominic's eyes widened as he sifted through the evidence. This is beyond anything I imagined," he muttered, voice low. "Pete needs to know." Meanwhile, in the estate's shadows, Jodie returned, silent and calculating. Her mind raced, plotting her next move, her grip on the empire she had built through manipulation and terror slipping. Desperation sharpened her thoughts. She had underestimated Annette. This maid had survived, had collected proof, had dared to challenge her authority. Pete, back at the estate, sat in his study, the weight of Dominic's revelations pressing down. Each photograph, each document, each recorded conversation unraveled the carefully woven trust he had placed in Jodie. His hands trembled as he stared at the evidence. Could he have been so blind? The thought made him sick. Annette remained near the hospital, refusing to leave Benjamin's side, but her mind was already racing ahead. She had survived the night, intercepted the threat, and secured the proof, but Jodie would not stop. Not yet. In her mind, Annette could see the outlines of what was coming. Jodie preparing a final, desperate move, one that would test every ounce of courage and cunning Annette had left. The game was no longer about observation or survival. It was now a battle of wits, deception, and danger where the stakes were life and death. The night deepened, and with it, a sense of inevitability. Somewhere, hidden behind doors and corridors, Jodie planned, measured, and waited. And Annette, fueled by determination and the knowledge of the horrors Jodie had orchestrated, steeled herself for the confrontation that was already beginning to take shape. The clock ticked. The pieces moved. The house, and everything inside it, was about to erupt. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glare across Benjamin's hospital room. Beeping monitors punctuated the heavy silence, each pulse of life a fragile reminder of the night's terror. Annette sat at the edge of the bed, gripping Benjamin's small hand, every nerve alert, every sense stretched thin. She had a feeling, a dreadful certainty, that Jodie would not be idle for long. And she was right. The door clicked softly. A shadow fell across the room. Jodie stepped inside, calm as ever, syringe concealed in her palm like a coiled viper ready to strike. Her eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the room. "Such a shame," she whispered, almost to herself, "that the little boy is in the way of progress." Annette's instincts flared. She sprang from her chair, lunging at Jodie before the needle could reach Benjamin. Their hands collided, wresting the syringe into a deadly tug-of-war. The metal glinted under the harsh hospital lights as their struggle intensified. "You think anyone will believe a maid?" Jodie hissed, teeth bared in a sneer, twisting in an attempt to break free. "No one will ever trust you. No one." Annette gritted her teeth, refusing to release her hold. "They will this time," she shouted, though doubt flickered in her mind, until the door burst open with a sudden crash. Pete strode into the room, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fear. What's going on?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Jodie froze, her eyes narrowing. In that instant, Benjamin stirred, his voice trembling but clear. "Daddy, she buried me," he whispered, the words barely audible, yet sharp enough to slice through Pete's disbelief. Time seemed to stop. Pete's world shifted beneath him. The woman he had trusted, welcomed into his home, smiled at, even confided in, she had tormented his son. The realization hit with the force of a hurricane, leaving him staggered, numb, and furious all at once. Jodie's face twisted in rage. You don't understand, she screamed, wrenching against Annette's grip. I did what I had to. Nobody will believe you, Benjamin. Nobody. Not this time, Annette spat back, tightening her hold on Jodi's wrist. Her resolve, built over weeks of fear, research, and quiet determination, solidified into a shield. She would not let this monster harm another child, or escape justice. Suddenly, Pete's men, summoned by Dominic, appeared at the door. They surged forward, blocking every possible escape. Jodi struggled violently, but her options were gone. Her shrieks filled the room, echoing off the sterile walls, raw with panic and fury. No, you can't. Her voice cut off as one of Pete's men grabbed her arms, forcing her downward. Annette held the syringe high, finally safe from her reach, as the other men cuffed her. Stop! Jodi screamed, thrashing against them. You don't know what I could have done. You don't understand. Dead maids, dead children. Pete watched, rigid and trembling, as the woman he had once considered part of his life was restrained, her empire of lies unraveling before his eyes. Benjamin clung to Annette, trembling, but alive. Police arrived moments later, the sound of their boots and radios filling the hallway outside. Jodi's screams escalated as she was escorted out of the room, shouting threats, her carefully constructed persona stripped bare. The truth she had buried for so long was finally coming to light, and there was no room left for escape. Pete sank into the chair beside Benjamin, his hands covering his face. The weight of betrayal pressed down with suffocating force. I'm so sorry, Benjamin, he whispered, voice breaking. I should have seen it. Benjamin leaned against Annette, small shoulders trembling. You didn't, he said softly. But she's gone now. You saved me. Annette's chest heaved with exhaustion, but a quiet relief settled over her. The evidence she had risked everything to gather had worked. The danger had not passed entirely. There were still questions to answer, legal battles to fight. But the immediate threat, the shadow that had haunted the estate for months, had been captured. Outside, Jodi's screams echoed through the hallways as she was led away by the authorities. Her threats, her cunning, her entire web of lies, all of it was unmasked. And within the sterile walls of that hospital room, a fragile sense of safety, however temporary, returned to Benjamin and the household she had tried to destroy. Annette straightened, glancing at Pete. His eyes, once clouded with doubt, now held a mixture of gratitude and solemn recognition. You did the right thing, he said, voice tight. All of it. Thank you. Annette offered a tired, small smile, brushing back her hair. We're not done yet, she said, though the first real flicker of hope in months warmed her chest. But tonight, she doesn't win. And for the first time in a long time, the house, once a prison of fear, felt like a place where the truth could finally breathe. The estate was quiet now, the kind of calm that follows a storm, the air still heavy with tension, but the immediate threat gone. Annette moved through the halls, her steps light, though her mind replayed every perilous moment of the past weeks. She found Pete in the drawing room, staring at the photographs and files that had revealed Jodi's tangled web of deceit. Annette, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. I can't express how sorry I am. I should have trusted you sooner. I should have seen the truth. She shook her head gently. You did what you could, Pete. It wasn't easy, and Jodi was convincing. You weren't alone in being fooled. Pete stepped closer, hands trembling. No. You saved Benjamin. You saved this family. And for that, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Benjamin, now pale but recovering, ran into Annette's arms. His grip was fierce, almost desperate, as if he had found his anchor in a sea of chaos. Don't ever leave me, he whispered, voice quivering. Annette held him tightly, feeling the raw weight of responsibility and trust settle on her shoulders. For the first time, she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She wasn't just a maid. She was part of the family now. Outside the estate, news outlets were ablaze. Reports detailed Jodi's multiple identities, her network of manipulation, and the shocking breadth of her schemes. Videos of her arrests, court documents, and photographs of her victims circulated globally. Headlines screamed, but in the quiet of the estate, the headlines mattered little. What mattered was safety, truth, and the fragile rebuilding of trust. Pete moved swiftly to restructure the household's security. All systems were upgraded, access tightened, and the influence Jodi had wielded was completely erased. The estate, once a gilded prison of fear, slowly became a home again, filled with cautious hope. When he finally spoke to Annette about her future, his voice was steady, but tinged with respect. We want you to stay, he said. Not as a maid, but as family. You've earned your place here, and Benjamin, well, he would never forgive me if he lost you now. Annette hesitated, heart swelling with gratitude and disbelief. She had walked through darkness, survived threats, and exposed a lifetime of lies. To be offered not just acceptance, but belonging felt almost unreal. I'd like that, she said softly, tears glinting in her eyes. Days passed in a slow rhythm of healing. Benjamin's laughter returned, tentative at first, but growing stronger with each passing hour. Annette helped him with homework, shared meals, and even took walks through the gardens, teaching him to trust again. Pete, quieter than usual, observed from a distance, sometimes joining in, sometimes simply watching, learning what it meant to rebuild a family fractured by deceit. Evenings became moments of quiet reflection. The sun dipped low, casting warm hues over polished floors and restored walls. Annette sometimes stood at the balcony, looking out over the estate, thinking of how fragile courage could be, yet how powerful. And in those quiet moments, she understood something essential. Bravery isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes, it's the small acts, the vigilance, the decision to act when fear demands inaction, that create the largest ripples in the lives of others. Benjamin's small hand found hers again one evening as they watched the sunset. "You're my hero," he said simply. Annette squeezed his hand, heart full. As the final shadows of night fell across the estate, the narrator's voice seemed to settle gently over the scene. Sometimes the smallest act of courage saves the biggest life. And beneath that quiet truth, an invitation lingered for anyone who had followed the story to carry the spirit forward. If this story moved you, join our community by subscribing. We tell stories for people who believe in courage, justice, and truth. The storm had passed. The house, once a place of fear and deception, had become a home again, and Annette, once merely a maid, had risen to become the guardian of that fragile peace.